Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, and in this video, I hope to give you some answers to these two questions. Some of the most common questions I get commented on my YouTube channel. How much will my SAT score improve? Can I reach my goal score in some number of weeks? These are very difficult things to answer because I don't know you, and this is very dependent on different people, so it's very hard to answer these questions in any very specific way. But I'm hoping that I can kind of talk about some general trends, and that will allow you to answer these questions maybe for yourself. So this is a graph that I tend to think represents the typical score improvement curve, okay? This is roughly going to be a 10-week study plan, so I will allude to that study plan throughout this video. The link to it is in the description, and usually 10 weeks, maybe a little less, 8 weeks, is an okay amount of time to be taking your first SAT, to prepare for and take your first SAT. And over the course of these 10 weeks, you're probably going to go through 4 different phases: the slump, the jump, the slog, and the plateau, okay? Now again, everyone's different, and so it might not quite look this way for you, but this is generally what I've seen after many years of working with a wide variety of students. They tend to kind of fit into these 4 different phases at different points in their prep: the slump, the jump, the slog, and the plateau. And let's talk about each one individually and kind of understand how it fits into the big picture, starting with Phase 1, the slump. Most people are going to start off their SAT prep by doing worse, right? So at some point, you might have taken a PSAT, and that's going to be your starting score. If you did not take a PSAT, my advice is don't worry about taking a practice test to start off your prep. Don't worry about it because your score is going to go down, and maybe it's better off that you spend the entire slump phase in the dark about how much worse you're doing. But for many people, they are going to go down 50 points, maybe a little bit more, maybe closer to 100, as they are learning the new strategies. Because during this first phase of your prep, the slump phase, you are going to be focusing on those big picture strategies that completely change the process you use to solve a lot of questions in the test. And those new strategies are going to feel very unnatural at first. You're going to feel weird doing it. And another big idea you're going to have for the SAT is that you cannot trust your instincts. And so as you're going through some practice questions here, you're doubting yourself. You're going to be slower, less confident. And then when you take that first practice test, which I usually want to time for the bottom of that slump, that's usually 3 weeks into your prep, that's when you're going to see the score go down a little bit. But hopefully that sets you up for the next phase, because as much as you're kind of struggling to use those strategies, you're also using this slump phase as an opportunity to try them out and to get used to them and to just experiment with new things. So kind of give yourself permission to slump, give yourself permission to have that score go down so you can set yourself up for the next phase where we hope that the score will jump, okay? Hopefully this starts as soon as you start reviewing your first practice test, where you're looking at some of these questions, hopefully watching my videos to review it and going like, I can't believe I got that wrong. This is so easy. That strategy would have worked so well. And that's where those new strategies become new habits. Instead of being something that you're kind of forced to do, it starts to become something that you automatically do. And during the jump phase, we might see the score go up 80 to 100 points from where you started. That would be really, really good. And as far as timing goes, I'm trying to get practice test 2 to be somewhere close to the top of the jump phase. That usually happens about 6 weeks into your prep. And there might be some more jumping to do, because even during that second practice test, you'll probably have a few moments where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I got that wrong. But it's probably going to be fewer opportunities for that. And so that's where the score improvement starts to slow down a bit. And that's okay, because that means now we're entering phase 3, the slog phase. And if you're not familiar with that word, I'll try to define it. A slog is like a tedious, laborious period. It's something that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. It's slow, it's frustrating. And you can definitely feel that during this phase of your prep. It is just very natural that you'll kind of start to reach a limit a little bit. Those big picture ideas that cause the score to jump so much, you might be able to refine them a little bit during this phase, but you're probably not going to see another big jump in score. You're just trying to pick up little points here and there. Most of this phase is going to be where you focus on individual topics that you noticed you struggled with on that practice test, right? So a great example would be in math. You might have to do a lot of work on like the circle equation, memorizing it, getting comfortable with it, maybe like probability questions. Those are topics that only show up on the SAT once per SAT, if that, sometimes not at all. But, you got to really know it, because if it does show up, you better know the stuff you need for those questions. And so you might have to spend an hour, 2 hours, maybe more on just probability questions, so that when that question happens to show up on your test, you're ready for it and you can lock up those 10 points. But that's kind of why the score starts to slow down. Now you're working on questions in a way that is really just bit by bit, 10 points at a time. It can feel very slow and tedious. And at some point during this phase, we want to take our third and final practice test, where we are hopefully getting toward the top. There might be a few things on that practice test where we're like, oh, I can still improve. I can still study this topic. But this is going to happen probably around week 9. And remember, this is a 10-step study plan or a 10-week study plan. So we're getting close to the end. And so you might be able to add a few more points in those last weeks, but probably not as much. And that's okay, because at some point in everyone's prep, you're going to hit a plateau. And that's frustrating. It means your scores are just leveling off. You're not improving anymore. My goal is for you to take your real SAT at the very start of that phase. That's, again, about 10 weeks that you would have been working on this SAT stuff before you take your real exam. And the reason that we want to take it at the beginning of that phase is that is a very frustrating phase. And I don't want you to feel burned out. I think a lot of people are losing steam at this point anyway, because you've been studying for 10 weeks. That's really, really difficult. So if we can take the test at that point, then first of all, we kind of avoid the plateau as showing up in practice tests, but we also can see that that practice test 3 is going to be fairly close to our actual exam. So we have a good sense of predictability there of what the real test would be. So how much will you improve during this kind of 4-phase score improvement? Probably around 150 points. That's a good goal. That is a very reasonable goal. That would be something to be proud of. You might be able to get 150 points in less than 10 weeks, maybe more like 8, but there's only so much that you can compress this, mostly because of that jump phase, the place where most of the points come from. The reason we jump in our scores is we are changing fundamental habits about how we think about the test. Changing habits takes time. Just think about it. If you've ever had to stop biting your nails or picking your nose or something, right? Or procrastinating, something that has to do with school as well. Those are difficult habits to break. They take time. They take a lot of effort. And so you can only compress this timeline so much before you kind of end up skipping the jump phase, which is where most of the score improvement comes from. But also keep in mind, this is a line of best fit. There's also natural variation in the scores as you go. And so those data points might not kind of line up perfectly with what we would expect your score to be at any point. So that can happen, especially close to the exam, where you might think you're started to slump again, that your SAT, your real SAT, is actually worse than your last practice test. But this is just part sometimes of normal variation. You might have gotten pretty lucky on practice test number 3, where you just guessed a couple of things right, and you got on kind of the higher end of what we might expect for where you are at that point in your prep. And then, of course, you might get unlucky on your SAT and just get a few more incorrect guesses, a few more bad guesses, and your score might be a little bit lower. And sometimes that can manifest as a 50-point difference. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It doesn't mean you're slumping. It's just natural variation. I would say anytime you take a practice test and you get a score, then just try to think of it as all right, there's kind of 30 points on either end that I could be in that range. And that line of best fit is kind of what we're tracking. But obviously, practice tests, real tests, these are individual data points that can be on either side of that line. So that does happen. I would also say that the colleges and everyone in this process really thinks about the variation as well. So if you're one of those people who's I got a 1390, but I really want a 1400, it doesn't matter. Everyone understands that those are the same thing, that there's a range there, and 1390 and 1400 are basically the same score. No one really cares about that 10 points. Regardless, though, you don't have to be done with the SAT after just one test. This is not necessarily your endpoint. Most people take the SAT more than once because maybe 150 points is not quite as much as they wanted. So let's kind of reset a little bit, push everything back, and try to think about what's going to happen next as you're preparing for your second SAT. It's probably not helpful to think in terms of number of weeks anymore, because now, yes, there is a typical score curve, but the variation gets more wild. So if you're thinking, oh, well, second time around, it's just going to be the exact same curve again, probably not. Almost certainly not. There's just way too much variation. Everybody is different. There's different strengths and weaknesses. You have different study habits, different timelines for when you're testing, just different ways of thinking overall. But regardless of what that second phase of your prep is going to look like, we can still think in terms of the 4 phases that we've been talking about: the slump, the jump, the slog, and the plateau. So to start off, you probably will slump again. This is pretty natural. I recommend most people take a break after their real SAT. The scores take about 2 weeks to come back. Perfect time to take a break. Don't think about the SAT, don't study, just let it happen. If for some reason you need to keep going, that sucks, but I would imagine that you'll have a slump there as well again, because you're going to be burned out. It's going to be hard on your brain to be constantly thinking about SAT prep all the time. Plus, remember, the slump isn't always bad. It might mean that you're forgetting things like the strategies, like particular rules, formulas, whatever, and you need to relearn those, so that can happen. But remember also, the time we had the slump at the beginning was because we were learning new habits. We were learning those bigger picture things that were really going to help us make those big jumps in score. So you can think of the slump as an opportunity. Whether you are forgetting things or learning new things, you can use it as a moment to kind of try new things and not so much worry about the consequences. So don't worry if it feels like you're doing worse as you get back into your prep. That actually might be a good thing. Because remember, the last time we slumped, it led to a jump. But I don't think you're going to see the same kind of jump that you saw before. So don't expect this kind of thing to happen twice. The second jump is probably going to be much lower. Adjust your expectations. It's probably not going to be 100 points, maybe 50, 60 points. If you're lucky, you might get 70. But it's probably not going to happen at all for most people. The jump is rare at the second time around because it's very hard to change those big picture habits. And that's really what it takes, is something fundamental has to change. It can't be like little things that you're memorizing. It has to be something that changes the way you work on a bunch of different questions, not 1 or 2, but like a dozen different questions. And so you might not have very many things that could apply to at this point in your prep. But if you are looking for another jump in score to see those numbers rise a lot, you really have to think of it in terms of some fundamental habit, something that's a big piece of my process needs to change. So I've got lots of different videos and lessons on weaknesses and things that can kind of target that and really start to get specific. It's hard to be specific right now, but that if you are struggling and you are looking for that jump, you got to think of some big picture idea. More likely, it's going to be that your second time around is more of a slog. You're in it for the long haul. You're adding your points bit by bit, topic by topic. It is much less satisfying, but it is still improvement. And I would say if you can end your second SAT 50 points higher than your last one, that's pretty good. 200 points overall is a good amount of improvement. And so it might not feel as satisfying, but you're still making progress. You are still improving that score. Of course, it can also be the case that instead of slog, you have a plateau. And some people do kind of get stuck where their scores do not change. They are just at a plateau for a very long period of time, maybe forever. Why does this happen? Well, the more general answer is that you're not learning new things. Or you are learning new things, but every time you learn something new, you forget something else. And it kind of just is this constant rotation of knowledge. And that's not good either. The scores go up because you're learning something new. So that can be very frustrating. But I would also warn you that, remember, there is that natural variation in the score, right? We can think of those practice tests and real tests as data points, and you're looking at like plus or minus 30 on either end of that. And you can see here, there's a lot of overlap between the slog phase and the plateau phase. So especially early on, you might think you're not improving. It might feel like you're not going anywhere, but you might be kind of in the slog, just kind of slowly inching upwards. So my advice there is just be patient, give it time. Obviously, if a number of weeks have gone by and the score is still not improving, then you probably are in a plateau. But that slog, at least at first, can feel like you're not going anywhere, but you might be. So just keep that in mind. Now, let's get back to kind of the score goals, the overall way we're thinking about things. And there's lots of ways to show up in that second SAT, right? There's lots of ways to improve the score. The different phases down here can appear in different combinations in different ways for different people. But overall, if you are getting 200 points of improvement from your starting score, that's very, very good. You should be proud of that. That is a success. That is probably where most people can end up with, a regimented study plan, a good work ethic, and learning new strategies, new habits. You might be able to do better than that, though. I would say, though, that the limit for most people is 300 points of improvement from their starting score. Like the vast majority of people are not even going to get to 300 points, but the vast majority are not going to get beyond that. It's just very, very hard. So it's time for a little honesty here. If your starting score is about an 1100, it's not a bad score, but to get to 1400, 300 points higher would be absolutely amazing. That is ridiculously good, okay? And it is very, very unlikely, no matter how much you want it, that you are going to see the 1500s. Now, some people will do it, but it's very, very, very rare. And it's not like just taking more time is going to eventually get you there. It just doesn't work like that. The truth is, and this is probably another topic for a whole other video, but in all my experience, I do think that in a way, the SAT is measuring intelligence, okay? A version of intelligence. And it is a fact of life that some people are smarter than other people. But I also firmly believe that intelligence is not a fixed trait, okay? You can improve your intelligence by just kind of doing practice and getting better, right? The score improvement itself is proof that you have gotten smarter over time, right? The fact that your score is higher now than it was at the beginning is proof that your intelligence has increased. And just like working out, you can build those muscles. I mean, look, these shoulders took time, okay? That can really work for your brain as well. The more you kind of work that muscle out, the brain, the bigger it's going to get, the stronger it's going to get, the better you'll get. But there are limits because even though your brain is working better over time, you only have about a window of 1.5 to 2 years to take the SAT. And, as a teenager, there's only so much change that your body, that your brain can go through in that amount of time. The brain needs to spend time with those new versions of itself before it can make another big change, another big leap. So I do think that for the vast majority of people, 300-point improvement is the upper limit of what's possible. So, some people do go up more. It does happen. Feel free to comment if that's you and be the counterexample, share your wisdom, and maybe that will help some other people. But my advice is that really do not expect to go up more than 300 points. And even that 200 is great. And the 300 is a bit of a reach. Adjust your expectations and your goals, and you are more likely to be happier and to actually achieve higher results because that stress and frustration are not holding you back. You really don't want to be chasing something that is an unlikely goal. And of course, if you are starting at a higher score, 300 points of improvement might not even be possible, right? Like if your starting score is a 1400, then you cannot get 300 points. There's not 1700 points on the SAT. So everything basically just gets compressed the higher your starting score is. So before we said 200 points would be very good. So you can see here that wouldn't really be possible for most people who are getting a 1400 to start. 100 points to go from 1400 to 1500 would be very, very good. To get to 1550 would be basically the upper limit of what I would expect. And again, that would be very rare. Most people are not going to be able to do that. That is a very, very tough goal. So adjust your expectations based on your starting scores as well. But regardless, try to think in terms of those 4 phases. No matter where your starting score is, no matter where you are in their timeline, just try to think about your prep and your scores as kind of having these 4 phases. And, the slump, the jump, the slog, and the plateau, that can explain where you are in your prep, what you need to do to get to the next phase, to get to the next level. There's probably some other videos I can make that deep dive into each of these phases and really talk about them in much more detail. So please ask any questions that you have, as that would inspire me to make those videos. But let's return first to our starting questions, the things that we set out to answer. So first of all, how much will your SAT score improve? As I said, first SAT, 150 points would be excellent. That would be a success. Overall, you take the SAT multiple times, you super score, 200 points would be fantastic, something to be very, very proud of. 300 points overall is absolutely amazing, but it is not going to be possible for most people. And thinking that you're going to get more than that is probably chasing a dream that is not going to happen. So adjust your expectations. And especially think about the time you have. Can you reach your goal in 10 weeks, 8 weeks, 5 weeks, 2 weeks? Put whatever number in for X that you have right now before your SAT. A lot of it is going to depend on your study habits. But habits are really the key, right? Because it takes time to change the fundamental ways that you think, right? You can't become a stronger reader overnight or a better math student overnight. The way you think about those fundamental topics needs to change, and it takes time to do that. So you need to budget time for those new habits to take place. Yes, you can learn some grammar rules, some math formulas, some vocab words, and that's going to help your score as well. But if you want to see those big jumps in score, you really need those bigger picture strategies to help you. And that's not something you can rush or procrastinate on or cram for the night before the test. So if you are looking to kind of work on those big picture things, make sure you use my channel to get started. I do have that study plan I've been talking about in the description. There's also a strategy series there. That is where most people want to start. That's step 1 of the study plan. And that contains all those big picture things that will eventually lead to your jump in score. But of course, you got to slump first before you can jump. Feel free to comment with any other questions. I really hope this helped. If it did, please subscribe. That really helps me out. And tell your friends about my channel. I'd love to get even more subscribers. That's a really great way to support the channel, is just tell other people to subscribe. Once again, I am Mike Settele for Settele Tutoring. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less. Settele for more. Thanks for watching.